Open your Bible with me to Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. We'll be looking at the first 8 verses. If you don't have a Bible, there's one in that chair near you. Excuse me. Verse 1. Now Jesus was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager. And this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager." The manager said to himself, "What shall I do? Since my master is taking the management away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, I am ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes." And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, and he began saying to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said, "Take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. Then another said, "How much do you owe?" And he said, 100 measures of wheat. He said, "Take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light." It's interesting. Until the 4th century, this parable of the unjust steward and the previous parable in chapter 15, which is really one giant parable, the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost 2 sons, were always seen together. But because of the chapter divisions that the monks placed in when they translated these passages, we have never looked at them together since. And it's a real tragedy, because this passage, which is really difficult and really kind of makes your whole body tremble, really should be seen in light with chapter 15. They should all be seen together. The verse starts, "Now he was also saying." I do believe that Jesus taught these passages probably together. And if not, it doesn't matter. Luke wants us to see chapter 15 and chapter 16 together. The similarities between this parable of the unjust steward and the parable of the prodigal son, as many of you will refer to it, or as Jeremy will refer to it, the parable of the 2 sons, they have tons of similarities, as you can see. There's a noble master in each who blesses each. There's a corrupt son or a corrupt manager in each who squanders the living. And there's just all these similarities where you can see they're really meant to be 2 parables shown in tandem. And when we read this parable this morning and we go through this, it's extremely important that we keep that in mind. Now, we're out of order. If you've been here every week and you're sitting here thinking, "Gosh, I don't remember going through the parable of the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost 2 sons," you were asleep. No, I'm kidding. Jeremy hasn't taught them yet. Just because of scheduling, we're going to do this slightly out of order. And so really, I'm going to be hitting this passage this morning. The next 3 weeks, Jeremy will come back, go through the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost 2 sons. And then I will come back after those 3 weeks, and we'll continue this passage because the parable's in, and Jesus then has this hammering conversation with the Pharisees where they are just really irate over these parables that have been told. And so, if you can remember that, it'll be very important. But this parable is a continuation of the parable of the prodigal son, or the parable of the 2 sons, if you will. In fact, some scholars have even called this parable of the unjust manager an appendix to the parable of the prodigal and his older brother. Jeremy will go into this in great detail, but there are really 3 audiences that are in existence when Jesus is speaking. He's got his disciples always by his side, and we know that from the passage this morning, that they're kind of off to the side and listening. There are 2 other key groups, and Jeremy will describe them in detail next week. One group is the Pharisees. They're there, and they're a little bit in the background. And there's another group that he will call the tax collectors and the sinners. Really, it's the outcasts, the people that don't feel like God wants anything to do with them, the people that don't feel like they belong. And so Jesus tells this amazing parable about the shepherd that looks for the one lost sheep, or the woman who throws her house upside down looking for the lost coin, or this father who receives this prodigal son back and then begs his older son to join him. And you can imagine these tax collectors and sinners just welling up with, "Wow, God is for us." And all the while the Pharisees are listening and feeling a bit hammered by Jesus for not being so inclusive. The subject of these parables of chapter 15 and 16, and then when Jesus starts in chapter 9 as he begins to speak about mammon, is not money. It looks like it is. Jesus will go on to say in 4 weeks when we look at it, that if you're not faithful with something like mammon, then God will not be faithful to give you these other things. But it's not really about money at all. It's really about what God is like. This whole chapter 15 and 16 is about what God is like and how gracious God is and what hardness we have towards Him and how that affects the whole thing. When you read this story, if you were listening to it as I read through it, it should have been disturbing to you at first glance. The parable seems to portray a manager or a steward, I'll use those two words interchangeably, who's working for an estate manager who cheats him out of half of what he has, and then Jesus commends him for being a lion and a cheat. And it just doesn't really sit well. In fact, in the 4th century in Rome, Julian the Apostate actually used this parable to tell the other Romans, this is why you should never follow this guy Jesus. He promotes lying, cheating, and stealing, and no noble Roman should ever fall prey to this kind of ideology. The parable is a classic 7-stanza poem like we've looked at. Kind of that inversion, if you will, where the center, verse 4, is always kind of the meat, and it's where the manager makes a decision to do something different. It's preceded by 2 verses that give us the problem. It's followed by 2 verses that give us the solution. And really the real question is, how would the listener have heard this parable? I've said this many times, and I know it sounds abrupt, but I could care less what you think the parable means. I could care less what I think the parable means. All I want to know is, what did the parable mean to the listener that sat at the feet of Jesus at the time? And that's what we will attempt to do this morning. Let's start with verse 1. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager. And this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. Now, several assumptions I think are very important to start out with. First of all, I believe these bad reports are actually coming from the master's friends. You'll notice in the verse, it never says the master of the estate ever checks out the reports. He assumes that the people giving him the report are correct and immediately acts upon that report. If these were hired guns, if these were employees or servants, he would have looked into it further. He doesn't. He completely trusts the person that's reporting to him, which tells me that it's more than likely his friends in the community that have watched this go on now are coming back to him and saying your manager is actually cheating you. Secondly, the master is clearly respected in this community. And you'll read different things in scholarly work. Some people believe the master is a louse. I don't agree with that at all. I think he's clearly respected in the community. If the master was a horrible guy, then people would say to themselves, he deserves to be ripped off. Don't say anything to him. He's getting everything coming to him. He clearly doesn't deserve to be ripped off. He's clearly got character, and the people know that, which is why they're coming to him. And just a side note, when you read parables, by the way, Jesus did not invent parables. There are a ton. In fact, you can buy a book of just parables, rabbinical parables that were written during the time of Jesus. They're fascinating. Jesus is just way better than the other ones. When you have a parable and there are 2 people, and one of them is corrupt in the parable, the other one is never corrupt. They're always noble. So Jesus is following a very standard form of teaching the parables. So the one is corrupt, the master clearly is not. A third quick assumption is that the language in this scene assumes a farming scene. This is not about banking. This is a farming scene. The Syriac, the Arabic, and the Coptic versions have all translated this word steward as an estate manager. What you have is you have a huge land estate with one guy, the master, that owns the entire estate. And he has parceled the estate out to other farm workers that can't afford to buy land, and they're renting a chunk of land. Let's say he's got 100 acres, and he's taking 20 acres and giving it to this guy. He's renting it, another 20, and that guy's renting it. And he has many servants, and he has one particular steward that is managing the whole thing for him. That's this guy, this manager. So that's the scene we're dealing with. Verse 2. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager. A couple of quick observations here. When the master says to him, what is this I hear about you? He is not asking a question. This is a rhetorical statement. What he's really saying is, I can't believe what has come into my ears about you, but he is not asking him for more information. He already knows what the steward is doing. Stunningly, which we'll talk about in a moment, the steward remains silent when he is spoken to. The other thing that is interesting to point out is this word accounting. Give an accounting of your management. It's really a little bit of a misleading translation. There's a definite article in front of this word in the Greek. It actually means account books. What he's really saying to him is, go get the account books and turn them over to me. In essence, the manager is being fired on the spot. This is really, really important to understanding this parable. What the estate manager is saying is, I've gotten the reports, I know they're accurate, go get the accounting books and turn them in. You no longer have a job with me. Super, super important. This guy, from this point on, is an ex-manager. He is not employed. He's fired. Anything the manager does from this point forward in the story is completely illegal, by the way. He's doing it of his own volition. He has no authority whatsoever. So at this point we know two things. Number one, the manager is an ex-manager. But number two, he has something very important for a very short period of time. What does he have? He's got the books. And they do carry deep authority. So what would the listeners expect the steward to do at this point? In the traditional Middle Eastern society, any employee, let alone the manager of an estate who has been fired, would never walk away without a discussion. If you've ever been to the Middle East, this is not a surprise. Everything is a negotiation. You can't get a cup of coffee there without a negotiation. So there's no way in a normal setting, that this manager, having been fired, would not engage in some kind of argument with the estate manager. He might say something like, look, there's a big misunderstanding. My father worked for your father, my grandfather worked for your grandfather. Excuse me. You can't do this over this small disagreement. Or he might say something like, bring the people that brought the bad reports so that I can talk to them, because they're obviously wrong. Or maybe there's confusion. I think somebody else must have ripped you off. Let's go look into this and find out who it might be. Ray, can you give me a glass of water? Sure. Got the Montana dirt deep in my lungs. But it's interesting. The manager gives none of these excuses. He remains completely silent, which anybody listening to this would be stunned at how guilty this guy clearly is. He also clearly knows that the estate owner is a different dude. He can't be coerced. He can't be manipulated. He won't change his mind. He knows this manager, this owner very well. His silence is stunning. Kenneth Bailey, who's a well-known scholar, lived in the Middle East for 40 years. I love this guy's writing. I don't necessarily agree with everything he writes, but wow, is he an insightful guy. And he said he interviewed tons and tons of people about this parable. Christian, non-Christian alike. Thank you so much. Excuse me. You're walking down the church, everybody. Oh, flip-flop. I hate that. Flip-flop malfunction. That's the story of my last 2 weeks. That's exactly what I've had, a flip-flop malfunction. Hopefully that's not going to become a disorder. Kenneth Bailey asked all of these people, have you ever heard of somebody being fired in the Middle East and not having a retort? And everybody said, I've never heard of this. It's never happened. Verse 3. Excuse me. The manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. So now jumps into self-talk, right? He says a couple things. First of all, I can't do labor anymore. I'm too old and too tired. And by the way, like particularly in the hilly parts of Israel, something like this, it's not like you get a plow into this. Everything is done by hand. You're moving every rock, building terraces, hand digging, hand pruning. It is difficult. He knows he can't do it. He also knows not only can't he beg, he's not even qualified to beg. It's not like he's got flip-flop disorder and he now has to beg and sit on the side of the street. He knows he's past that. So what's interesting to me is maybe this guy has a half an ounce of character. He actually knows what he's like. Verse 4. I know what I shall do, so that when I'm removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes. He states his goal. What is it? What is his goal? Self-preservation. Great answer. How does he want to self-preserve himself? Leveraging relationships. Another great answer. He says to himself, I will demonstrate how shrewd of a manager I am, and at the same time, make myself a friend with another house so that I have somewhere to go because I have nowhere else to go. A total side note, and I do not want the sermon to go this direction, but you have to remember, within 30 years, Israel would be decimated by Rome. Jerusalem will be burned to the ground. There is a side message here to the Israelites and to the leadership. You better wake up and you better start preserving some friendships. In other words, you better treat Rome differently and you better handle your relationships differently because you won't even have a house to go to. We'll set that aside, but I do think that peace sits in this. Verses 5 through 7. And he summoned each one of his master's debtors, or renters. And he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. And he said to another, how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. As we talked about in the Old Testament study, sin breeds sin. It never stops. It just creates more. So instead of just confessing and repenting and coming clean, he decides, I'll just beg, steal, and borrow on top of what I've already done, and I'll do it for an intent. And it's interesting. He makes them come to him. Did you notice that? Why do they come to him? This is when you hate it when the teacher's asking, I'm only looking for one answer. I hate that. He still thinks he works. They still think he works for the estate owner. Do you see that? The only reason they are willing to come to meet with him is they assume he's still employed. He has the accounting books, which carry the authority of the estate manager, and for the brief time before he turns them in, he gets to pretend he still works with them. They would never come to him, these renters, if they knew he was already fired. It's not harvest time, so they assume the master of this estate has something very important to say to them. So they come, and this is exactly what he wants. And by the way, you'll notice he has them come one at a time. This guy is really smart. Let's keep everybody separate. Let's keep the stories apart from one another so I can work these deals and hopefully have a home to land in. Ibn Al-Tayyib, who's an Arabic scholar of the Gospels, said this, take your bill, sit down quickly and write 50. This means sit down before my master takes the accounting books from me and write 50 instead of 100. And for the extra 50, the two of us will divide them between one another. The steward should have safeguarded his master's money, but instead he gives half of the debt away, or at least close to it, in order to win these renters over. The renters, by the way, agree to this embezzlement scheme, and they become guilty as well. And it's interesting to me, on the one hand, the renters will never lodge a complaint against the manager because they're implicated. But the flip side is also true. Remember, this is an honor-shame-based society in the Middle East. Honor is everything. If the renter gets caught, all the renter has to say is, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was fired. I would have never done this. But they clearly have figured it out at this point. So everybody except for the master in this parable is corrupt. The renters are corrupt, and they've worked the scheme out, and the manager is corrupt in this whole deal. And everybody has a way to do this that has worked out. The manager says, while I still have this accounting book for an hour or two, I'm going to work out a deal with people. I'll get some money out of it, and I'll work out a friendship with somebody else so I have somewhere else to go work. And the renters are safe because they're saying, if I'm caught, all I have to do is plead innocence and non-knowledge, right? I didn't know. I'm so sorry this happened. And every conversation they're having is private. Nobody knows. So there are no witnesses, and they can maintain their honor in the whole thing. And it's obvious why this manager is in such a hurry. Because the minute he turns the books over, his power to make friends is completely gone. And just a side note, when the manager asks each renter what they owe him, it's not because he doesn't know, because he doesn't know himself. He has the books. He wants to make sure the renter agrees you owe 100 measures of oil. And by the way, that's a ton of oil. It's a huge amount. It's about 500 denarii. It's the amount that a farm worker would make in a year and a half's time. These are huge debts because it's an agricultural society. If I rent you 20 acres, you're not paying me in money. You're paying me in agricultural goods. So the master would get the measures of, percentage of the oil, percentage of the barley, percentage of the wheat. And so these are huge, huge amounts. And I think the other thing that's amazing is the manager has them do it in their own writing. Again, he's implicating them farther in the whole deal so that everybody's enmeshed, everybody's guilty, and everybody's stuck in the scheme. The renter will keep his mouth shut, the manager will keep his mouth shut. The renter will make money out of this, the manager will make money out of this, and they'll forge a friendship and give him a place to go land and live when his master kicks him out. When this is all done, the manager takes the cooked up books and with a wry smile hands them over, like the Grinch, to the master with the, I got it. And at this point, as a listener, you're wondering, how will the master respond? He obviously has options. Legally, he not only can throw this guy in jail, he can actually sell the manager and his entire family into slavery to pay back what is owed him. Legally, this master has a ton of recourse to claim everything that is owed to him. But he doesn't. He remains completely silent. He forgives the debt of the manager. He forgives the debt of the renters and remains silent. So what is this passage here for? Well, in 4 weeks, when we begin the discussion between Jesus and the Pharisees, it will be a lot more clear. But several things have been hitting me as I've been reading through this. First of all, I think a great way to sum up this passage is the theory of the crazy master. It's a lot like the father, isn't it, Jeremy? In the prodigal. You could also term that the parable of the crazy father. No father reacts like that when his son, when he's still alive, takes away half of his inheritance and squanders it all and then comes back to him and expects to live there. No master does this when his manager rips him off and then knowingly, with a wry smile, hands the books back to him and says, I got you. What kind of dude is this? I mean, you're left with saying to yourself, either this master is the biggest fool and idiot I have ever seen in my life, or he's the coolest guy I've ever come across. He doesn't care about debt. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about all these things that are owed to him. None of it matters to him. You'll see the same thing when Jeremy teaches the passage. You have to imagine when this father takes his prodigal back in, people are looking at him like, what an idiot. He's just got the wool pulled over your eyes. He's ripping you off. What father responds I think the parable also shows just how corrupt an environment God has to work with. Everybody, except for the master in this parable, is a broken mess. Welcome to me. You know, I used to struggle with the book of Judges because it's just such a decrepit book in the Bible. And I finally realized maybe the biggest point that the book of Judges is in the Bible is because it shows how dark we are and can become, and how far God has to reach into the pile to pull something good out of it. God is comfortable with this situation. The master, if you will, is willingly and lovingly and knowingly working with a bunch of us who, quite frankly, can't get our day straight. If you were in that spare bedroom last night and listened to the out loud self-talk as I began to throw batteries around the room, you would know of what I speak. Amen? This is not a foolish master. This is a master with his eyes open, who knows what we're like and doesn't hold it against us, even though we do. Why we do that when he doesn't, I don't know. A third thing that hit me in this is found in verse 8. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he acted shrewdly. Notice, he doesn't say he acted with honesty, right? He doesn't praise him for his dishonest behavior. He praises him for being clever. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light, those who claim to follow Jesus. This guy's morals are deplorable. His motives are awful. And yet Jesus says he's smarter in the way he deals with life than those of us who consider ourselves believers and followers of Jesus Christ. That is quite a weighty statement to chew on. At least a cheat knows that friendship and trust mean more than money, because friendship and trust will lead to even more money. He's at least smart enough to know that, and yet we are not. We cling to what we have, when what we're called to do is actually take everything we have and invest it into humanity in a clever way. In a weird way, he's saying to us, buy people into heaven with what you have. Now, I know that sounds strange, but there's truth to this. Do you know, aside from getting to just sit next to the Father and just hug Jesus and go elk hunting with him, what I'm looking forward to the most, because he'll help me shoot one, by the way, because that hasn't happened in 4 years. Do you realize every person on this planet, during this brief period of time that you're here, that you invested, that is in the kingdom of God and in heaven when you get there, will actually greet you with a smile. Every day you get up and walk around, people will just smile at you and say, wow, thank you for investing. Can you imagine that going on all day for eternity? Someone that you had no idea there was any effect whatsoever, but you took the extra 2 minutes to be caring. You actually reached into your wallet and realized it wasn't yours to begin with. You actually shared your vehicle, shared your house, shared your vacation, shared your time, shared your soul. Every time we do that, we are investing into the kingdom and into the hearts and lives of the people that will one day greet us and hang with us in eternity. Do you ever think that during the day? This guy I was smart enough to know that. And Jesus says, oh, that we were so wise and clever with what we had. Oh, that we did not clutch and grasp and claim what is not ours even to begin with. May we be a people not under pressure, not under compulsion, not for the sake of guilt or shame, but for the sense of this master is the coolest dude ever, and he should hold so much against me, and he holds none of it against me, and it makes me feel so good. I just want to invest everything I have into other people, so that one day, on a whim, in partnering with the Spirit of God, I might see them in heaven, and they might smile at me and say, thank you so much, because you were a part of me being here. Let's pray. Father, the irony in this passage just drips. On the one hand, when we have a brief moment of clarity, we see how weak and broken we are, how faulty, how unfaithful, how inconsistent. And yet, in the midst of that, and owning that, and being honest with that, you say, I do not hold that against you. Now partner with me. Not as some underling, but as a co-heir with Christ. Partner with me. Invest in humanity that we might sit together one day in eternity and just smile at each other. Father, may we not count ourselves unworthy. That'll check us out the King. We're worthy of dying for, according to you. May we claim that. And in gratitude and deep emotional connection, simply allow what you've poured into us to pour onto the people around us. In the smallest of things. Thank you for your deep love.